These are three of the biggest mistakes that athletes make in the college recruiting process. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Jack Kruger. I run D1 Scholarship. We've helped hundreds of athletes navigate through the process, 13 different sports. We've generated millions of dollars in scholarships. So I'm just going to lay this out for you. So the first one has to do with the schools that you target, like the ones that you want to get on the radars of. And we're going to talk about really these two pyramids. So this first one, this is what most people do in the process, right? So they typically start by putting 10 to 30 schools on their list. They say, these are the schools that we are most interested in. And they pursue these schools for usually about 6 to 12 months, okay? And so they try this. The problem is that this is a very small number of schools in college recruiting, respectively. It might be a lot of schools for you because these are the ones that you're most interested in. But in the grand scheme of things, this is a very, very, very small number. And so a lot of families struggle to generate interest because it's not a large number of schools, but also because usually most of the time, if we're being honest, these are reach schools. Right? At least half of those schools are schools that your kid is super interested in playing at, but man, they might be a little bit of a stretch, which means that if you contact even just 30 and you take half of them are reach schools, it means you really only contacted 15 that they're capable of playing at, which is a very small number. And so most families struggle to generate interest doing that. And so what happens is about 6 to 12 months later, they say, all right, that didn't work. We need to expand our list. And so they expand out to like 30 to 50. They're like, we need to add more because this isn't working. The problem is that you've lost 6 to 12 months in this period. And so there's less schools at this point that are still looking for your kid's position in grad class than there were in the beginning. And so even though you contact more, there are less of them that are interested. And so you still struggle to get interest until you get to the end of the process. And you're like, listen, we'll just take anybody, right? Maybe you know someone that's in this position in recruiting. Maybe you're in this position where you're like, man, I'll just take anything at this point. We need some sort of traction, right? And this is where families tend to get panicked. And so instead of doing this, here's what I would say. If you're going to do this down at the bottom, let's just start with this, right? We really want this to look like an inverted pyramid. And so instead, what you really want to do is you want to contact a lot of schools in the beginning. Why? For a couple reasons. One is because then all of these schools likely still need your kid's position in grad class. So your reply rate is going to be much higher than it would be if you were contacting them down here at the end of the process. The second reason is because you might not really know what is a good fit for your kid yet. They're still, 16 years old. They're trying to figure out what they want out of their college experience, what they want to study. Do they want to be far from home or close to home? And so it's best to get a wide range of schools so that you can start comparing them to one another and really figuring out what is a great fit for my kid. And so what ends up happening is you contact a whole bunch of schools and then you filter it down to maybe 5 to 15 that have already expressed interest in your kid. So you've knocked, the hardest thing out of the park here. You've already checked the hardest box. And so then you can go to those 5 to 15 and you could do more research on them and figure out, well, which of these is actually the best fit? And so by the end of the process, the hope is that you have 3 to 5 schools that are genuinely interested in your kid that you now get to choose between, right? And so while everyone else over here is panicking and expanding their list to include literally everybody, you, on the other hand, are now filtering down and getting to be more selective because you went wide in the beginning. This is the first big mistake that I see a lot of families make, is they operate like this on the left side because they want to be picky. Right? They want to be selective. They don't want to settle for a school they're not interested in. But what you have to understand is contacting a lot of schools here doesn't mean that you're settling. It actually means that you're going to be able to be more selective just toward the end of the process instead of the beginning of the process. That's the first mistake. The second common mistake that I see people make has to do with follow-ups. So here's how this works. When you get into college recruiting, there's this thing that I call the confidence threshold. It essentially means how interested a coach is in your kid. So when you start the process and you're not talking to any schools, you're here, right? You're 0% of the way through the process. Coaches don't know that your kid exists. They don't need your position in grad class, maybe. They don't think your kid is good enough, right? This just means that you're nowhere in the process yet. And what happens is when you send an email to a coach, you post on social media, they see you at an event, something like that, then their interest might grow. And they might go to like 20% here, right? Now, a couple big things about this. The first thing I'll say is a coach is not magically going to go from this stage at 20% all the way to the point where you go to 100% and they're giving them a scholarship. That's not just going to happen by chance. You have to actively build the relationship with the coach to the point where they feel comfortable giving you a $50,000 scholarship. The second thing here is that a lot of families think that generating interest, like starting conversations with college coaches, is the hard part. It's not the hard part. That's the easy part of college recruiting. And so what happens for a lot of families is they maybe start doing this on their own, like they're doing emails on their own, posting to social media. Maybe they get a little bit of traction and they think that they're like here 80% of the way through because they think starting the conversation is the hard part. And they're like, man, we're already so close, you know? But that's not the case. You're not here when you start talking to a coach. You're here. And you still have 80% of the process. That's the hard part. The hard part in college recruiting is turning interest into offers. It's not generating the interest in the first place, right? And so you have what I call the confidence threshold. And it's that through each stage of the process, a coach has different needs. So in the beginning, they're just sort of intrigued. They watch your kid's video. They're like, this kid looks pretty good. There might be something here. So then they're like, all right, we need to get a little bit more of a look on them. And they grow slowly over time. So they're now at 40%. They're like, okay, this is worth a second look, a third look. Then they're watching you closely. You're on a short list, maybe 5 players. And they're like, this is worth looking at. Like, we need to watch this player. But again, you're only 60% of the way through. You're not going to get an offer at this point yet. Until you get toward the end, very interested, this might be the player we're looking for. This is usually when there's like 3 players that they boiled it down to, and they're trying to pick between the 3. And if you just sit back and hope that it's you, the odds are what? 1 in 3 that it's you. That's a 33% chance. I'd much rather you actively continue to build the relationship so your odds are better than 33%. And then you get to the 90%. It's like the last interview. They want to talk to you one more time. They want to see you play one more time. And then eventually you earn the scholarship. So one of the biggest mistakes that I see families making is assuming that because they get interest, that the coach is just magically going to end up giving them a scholarship. And that rarely ever happens, especially in a world with the transfer portal where coaches can go get collegiate level players who are bigger, faster, stronger, older, more mature. Like, you have to actively build the relationships with college coaches. Again, the stages of interest go from they don't know you exist to, hey, they know that you exist, but they're not really sure yet. Then they get intrigued. They watch your video. They're like, wait, this actually might be a player worth watching. Then they're genuinely interested. They're actively recruiting you. Seriously interested is you're on the short list, right? There might be 3 players they're deciding between. They're 100% sure, and boom, you get the money, right? So that's the second piece is you need to actively build relationships with college coaches. You'll miss out on thousands, maybe tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars in scholarships if you don't do that. And then the third biggest mistake that I see has to do with showcases and camps. So a lot of people are using showcases and camps for exposure in the recruiting process. So they're doing something like this. They're playing this on hard mode. So they go to an event. There's 100 players there, right? They've never talked to any of the coaches that are going to be there. And so in order to get on their radars, they have to do something absolutely incredible to stand out. And there's so much that's out of your control. The stars have to align when you go to an event like this. If your kid plays baseball and they're a hitter and the pitcher is trying to light up the radar gun so they don't throw a pitch anywhere near the zone and they walk on 4 pitches, oh, there goes your opportunity. Or if your kid is a striker in soccer and there's no good pass or cross that comes the entire day, well, there goes your opportunity. Or if your kid's a wide receiver and the quarterback sucks and there's never a good pass for your kid to show their speed and high pointing balls and all that cool stuff, oh well, right? And so there's just so much that's out of your control and you just get so few opportunities to actually prove yourself. Whereas there's another way to do this, right? Where there's 100 players at that same showcase, but the coach has a list going into the showcase and your kid is on it. And this is what's happening at a lot of showcases. Coaches go in with a list of players that they want to watch. They're not just going in with a blank, fresh slate here to watch the players. No, that's not what they're doing. They're coming in with a list of players already to watch. And they might happen to see someone who's not on the list, but again, all the stars have to align in order for that to happen. And so the coaches are going to watch you 5 times as much as they're going to watch anyone else. So you're going to get multiple opportunities to prove yourself. It's more just validating that what they saw in your video before the event is true. So there's a lot of people making the mistake of using showcases and camps for exposure in recruiting. Listen, there's really only 3 reasons that you should ever go to a showcase or a camp. So development, you think that by going to this event, your kid is going to walk away a better player. 90% of the time, that's not going to happen, right? Second one would be experience. This is where you want your kid to get some experience for events like this so that in the future, when they do have to play well and the pressure is on, they're used to it. They've been in that environment before. This is a great reason to go to an event, right? So it's not the first time that they're in that environment. And then the last one would be exposure. You're trying to get on college coaches' radars. And so my question would be like, what is your goal before you choose to go to a showcase or a camp? Because if you don't have a goal, you are just wasting money. You're just hoping that it's going to work out for you. You're throwing money at the process, hoping that something sticks, right? And so when you're picking showcases and camps, there's really 5 things that you should be considering. The first one is the level of interest. So how interested is the school in your kid that you're about to go to the showcase of, right? Because there's different levels of interest. I call this the hierarchy of interest. So not all interest in recruiting is the same. So in the beginning, you don't have any interest, right? They don't know who your kid is. Then maybe they follow you on social media. Now that's not nothing. Coaches aren't following players they think suck on social media, but it's also not as strong as if they call your coach or as if you're having an email or DM conversation with them, which is not as strong as a text or phone call conversation or as a visit and then eventually an offer. And so what you want to do is you want to ascend coaches to each level in the hierarchy, and the higher they are on this list, right? Something like this is worth going to a showcase or a camp for because they know who your kid is. You have positive signal that they actually think they're good, that they're recruiting their position in grad class, much more likely to be worth your time and money. The second one is how much you like the school. So if you really like the school, it's at the top of your list, you might be willing to sacrifice on a couple other of these categories just because of how much you like the school. If you don't like the school that much, all these other categories better be in place. Then you have the amount of interest that you currently have. If you're only talking to 2 schools or 4 schools, then you might have to go to more events just because you don't have a lot of momentum in the process right now. If you're talking to 10, 15, 20 schools, then you won't have to go to as many events because you're going to be able to pick and choose for the schools that are most interested in you. Then, of course, you have proximity. So how close is the event to you? If you have to fly across the country, then again, a lot of these columns better be in place. But if it's only a 2-hour drive, you should just be going to that no matter what because it's a no-brainer. It's worth your time. It's not that hard to get to. It's not that expensive, right? And then, of course, that leads us to cost. How much is the event? Are you flying across the country? Is it local? Planes, trains, rental cars, hotel rooms, whatever it is. So these are the 5 things that you should be looking at when you're picking showcases and camps. But again, this is one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make is they just say, we're going to go to as many of these showcases and camps as we can go to because I've heard they're important, but you're just going to end up wasting a lot of money and you're not going to like the results that you get. So those are the 3 biggest mistakes that we see families making consistently in the recruiting process. If you're the parent of a high school athlete, and you're interested in getting some help through the process, you can click the link in the description to schedule a call with us. And otherwise, I'll see you guys next time.